Back in 1977, a stuntman decided to make a movie. The result was an instant classic filled with quotable lines, unforgettable characters, iconic cars, and great chase scenes. And one of the most memorable was the bridge jump scene where Bandit leaves 3 police cars behind him and jumps to freedom. And that's what we're going to have a look at today. We're going to have a look at what they did, why they did it, which bits worked, which bits didn't. So jump on in and let's go. So, how do you make the perfect car chase? Well, for me, it's a number of things. So I'm going to break it down into the following categories, and I'm going to award a score out of 10 for each category. So we're going to have a quick look at the movie, the cars, the characters, and the location. Then we'll have a deep dive into the chase itself. We'll look at the crashes and the climax, and then we're going to take off any points for any mistakes. In the end, we're going to have a score out of 70. So let's see how Smokey and the Bandit does. Smokey and the Bandit tells the story of 2 men and their attempts to smuggle alcohol across state line. And that's because back in 1977 it was illegal to transport Coors beer east of Mississippi. Now the official reason for this was that Coors wasn't pasteurized, it didn't have the preservatives that other beers had. With most trucks being unrefrigerated, it was deemed unsafe to transport it too far away from its base in Colorado. And this law stayed in place until 1986, although it didn't stop presidents like Eisenhower and Ford stockpiling Coors at the White House. Two other fans of Coors beer, Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds. And while making Gator in 1976, Hal used the struggle of trying to get hold of Coors beer as his inspiration to write Smokey and the Bandit. So the film centers around Bandit, who makes a bet with 2 rich Texans that not only can he smuggle this beer in, but he can go from Atlanta to Texas and back in 28 hours. The prize, $80,000. Now the smuggling of Coors across state line was a big issue at the time, so Bandit's strategy was to drive a fast car, get the police to chase him, leaving a clear path for his friend who's driving the truck full of booze. Now it's all going to plan until Bandit picks up a runaway bride, and that's because the man she was about to marry is the son of a relentless Texas sheriff. Now the sheriff doesn't know anything about the bootlegging, so he doesn't understand why Bandit's so desperate to get away. Bandit doesn't know anything about the groom, so he doesn't understand why this Texas sheriff is chasing him all the way to Georgia. But it brings all the eyes of the police onto him, makes his mission a million times more difficult. Now it's hard to categorize Smokey and the Bandit. Is it a truck film, a car film, a family comedy, a love story? In truth, it's all of these, and despite being Hal Needham's first movie, it smashed the box office. It came second in 1977 only to Star Wars, comfortably beating the likes of Saturday Night Fever, Close Encounters, The Spy Who Loved Me. Hal Needham had a budget of just $4 million, and $1 million of that went to pay Burt Reynolds, yet the movie grossed $125 million at the box office. Now there were 2 sequels, but despite some good car scenes in each of them, they couldn't capture that magic of the first one. But the Hal Needham-Burt Reynolds partnership would go on to create classics like the Cannonball Run movies, Stroker Ace and Hooper. But it was Smokey and the Bandit that started it all, and 46 years later it still holds up. So I've no choice but to give it a 9.5 out of 10. Now let's have a look at the cars. Right, now there's meant to be 4 cars involved in this chase, but thanks to a continuity error we actually get 5. So we've got Bandit's 1977 Pontiac Trans Am, we've got the Sheriff's 1977 Pontiac Le Mans, and we've got 2 1975 Plymouth Fury police cars. But one of these gets switched halfway through the chase to a 1972 Plymouth Satellite. Now in this scene, just like the rest of the movie, the police cars are bland, they're unremarkable, and that's by design. They are there so that Bandit can escape from them, that's it. And throughout the movie we see the same 2 or 3 models of car, just in different colours with a different sticker on the door indicating what state they're in. Now arguably equally as famous as Burt Reynolds in this movie is the car he drives. Now you talk to most car guys, you say Black Trans Am, they'll say Smokey and the Bandit. Now Hal Needham picked this car after seeing it in a magazine. He thought it would be perfect to the Bandit, and honestly I can't imagine him driving any other car. Now the problem with the Trans Am, despite how good it looked, it didn't necessarily have the performance to back it up. There's quite a few scenes in the movie where they actually had to dub the sound of the engine from the movie Two Lane Blacktop over the top of it to make it sound like it was a bit more beefy than it was. And as we'll find out with this scene, they had to swap the engine out completely to enable it to be able to do the bridge jump. But none of this matters. The Black Trans Am is as much a part of this film as the Bandit is. And following the film's release, Pontiac couldn't build them quick enough, with some reports claiming up to a 2-year waiting list if you wanted a black one. Now, just as the Trans Am is perfect for Bandit, the Le Mans is perfect for the Sheriff. Movies are all about contrast, and the contrast between Bandit and the Sheriff is mirrored perfectly with these cars. So the Trans Am, it looks cool, it looks energetic, it looks youthful. The Le Mans, it already looks dated, it looks big and heavy. Now, with the other cars there, just to make up numbers, scoring it's quite difficult. Obviously, Bandit's car gets a 10, but for this scene, I'm going to give them an 8 overall. Now let's have a look at the characters. Now, in the good old days before smartphones, the only real way for people on the road to communicate with each other was through CB radio. And just like social media now, people got to choose their own name or handle.
Come back, Bandit!
Bandit. Is that your name or your profession?
That's my handle. Bo's my real name.
Now, there's 5 main characters in this scene. We have Bo Darville, or Bandit. We have Carrie, Frog. We have Buford T. Justice, known as Smokey, because that's one of the terms that was used for police in CB Radioland. We have his son Junior, and we have Sheriff Bramford. Now, there's no real backstory in any of these characters, and we don't really need it. All we really know about Bandit, he's a legendary truck driver. Everybody knows him, everybody loves him except for the police, but nobody loves Bandit more than Bandit does. And while this isn't usually a desirable quality in people, we as the audience love him too, and we're rooting for him throughout the film. Now, Hal Needham's 2 main loves were westerns and car chases, and the opening of Smokey and the Bandit harks back to some of those westerns with an opening song all about the bandit, which sets up the movie for us.
You heard about the legend of Jesse James and John Henry, just to mention some names. Well, there's a truck driving legend in the South today, a man called Bandit from Atlanta, GA.
Now, just like all the songs in the film, they're written and performed by legendary country singer and actor Jerry Reed, who plays Bandit's friend Snowman. Now, for as little as we know about Bandit, we know even less about Frog. And all that we really know about Frog is she's a travelling dancer who one day meets Junior, impulsively decides to marry him, quickly regrets her decision, leaving him at the altar. Now, the chemistry we see between Frog and Bandit on the screen is real. Burt Reynolds and Sally Field would do 4 movies together and date each other for 5 years, with Burt still referring to Sally as the love of his life in 2016, claiming that the breakup of that relationship was his biggest regret. Now, at the stage of the movie where the jump scene happens, Frog and Bandit, they're still feeling each other out. They're still getting to know each other. And in a classic mating ritual, Bandit proves himself to Frog by completing a jump. Frog's reaction shows she could be just the right kind of girl for Bandit. Now, chasing Bandit is the Smokey, Sheriff Buford T. Justice. And again, not a whole lot of backstory. But just like Bandit, nobody loves Buford more than Buford does. Now, Buford's a tricky character to get right. He's inept, but the bandit can't lose him. He's rude to everyone, but the audience loves him. He's horrible to his son, but he's chasing his estranged bride from state to state. We don't want him to catch the bandit, but we want him to stay in the chase. Junior is a lovable idiot, no brains but a heart of gold, and somehow he's also a police officer. And even though he looks up to his father, he adores him, he always seems to do something wrong which just agitates him.
Daddy. I hope your goddamn head was in it.
Sheriff Bramford and his deputies in Arkansas, they're just the latest bunch of police to try and catch the bandit and fail. Now, this scene is a good representation of the movie as far as characters go. So we see yet another police force being outfoxed by the bandit. We see Buford being rude to people, crashing his car, losing the bandit temporarily, but ultimately taking the win because he's got one over on a fellow sheriff. We see Bandit out-driving everybody, taking complete control, with Frog being completely enamoured by him. So by this stage of the film, the characters are well established, and despite them all being different, we've warmed to all of them. So for a score, I'm going to give 9 out of 10. Now let's have a look at the location. Now this scene is said to take place somewhere in rural Arkansas, but just like the rest of the movie, it was actually filmed in Georgia, with the real-life Flint Bridge being in Jonesboro, Georgia. But regardless of where it was filmed, the location is perfect for this scene. As we start off on the road, then into the backwoods, down dirt tracks, and across the collapsed bridge. Now, as we'll talk about later, filming on dirt roads, it's not easy, and there are some compromises that need to be made. But for what we need out of this scene, it had to be a dirt road. It had to be a collapsed bridge on a pretty much abandoned road that no one really travels on. As Bandit travels down the dirt road with the trees either side of him, he's penned in. So his only escape route is to jump the bridge. And not only does the bridge give us some great shots, it's also believable. It's believable that this is a genuine bridge that's collapsed. It's not just been built for a movie. And once you've made the jump, you can see houses, civilization in the background to complete Bandit's escape. So as locations go, it does exactly what we needed to at each part of this scene. So 9.5 out of 10. So now we've set it up, let's have a look at the chase. The chase has a little bit of everything, starting on the road, heading to dirt tracks, and then ultimately with the bridge jump at the end. Now the important thing to remember with this scene, as with all chase scenes in Smokey and the Bandit, is that this is a family movie. So there's no big explosions, dramatic barrel rolls, cars going off cliffs, anything to insinuate death or serious injury. And often after a crash we'll see the person getting out of the car to show us that they're okay. Now filming on dirt roads has its pros and cons. It can look more dramatic because of all the dust and the dirt flying up, but the cars can't travel as fast as they can on tarmac, and we see that in relation to trees or any other frame of reference. And because of this, they have to find other ways to generate speed, so we have cars drifting whenever possible, kicking up that dirt, cars moving from side to side, and they've even sped the film up in places which we'll get onto later on. So the chase starts when Bandit sees a roadblock up ahead, a roadblock set up by Buford when he'd lost the Bandit a few miles back. With the police being inept, however, they've given the Bandit an escape route before he's even got to the roadblock.
He went right through a roadblock. You some bitches couldn't close an umbrella.
With the police scrambling to cut him off, Buford catches up and is now part of the chase too. With Bandit desperate for an escape route, he's heading through people's backyards, eventually heads down a dirt road towards the collapsed bridge. There's 3 places to put your cameras when you're filming a car chase. Outside the car, on the car, or inside the car. Now the audience's perspective is dependent on where you put the camera. The important thing in this chase is the only car that the camera is in is Bandit's. All the other cameras are observing Bandit, so we're seeing it from the police's perspective, but we're watching Bandit do his thing. When we're in Bandit's car though, we're in there with him, we're experiencing what he's experiencing. And this is the same throughout the movie. The only other vehicle that the camera is in is Snowman's truck. That's because they're doing this mission together and we are literally along for the ride. Now in the context of the rest of the movie, we know that Bandit can't afford to be off the road for too long. He's got Snowman carrying a trailer full of illegal booze, completely unguarded, and he's also against the clock to get back to Georgia. So when we see him driving through people's backyards, through the washing, we know he doesn't know where he is. And we need him to get back on track. So there is an element of relief when he finds the dirt track. Hopefully now he's just going to accelerate away from them, back onto the road and back onto his mission. Now just as we think the Bandit's going to escape, we learn that the Mulberry Bridge has been dismantled for the last 6 months.
Listen, I don't care if your daddy is the mayor. You wreck this car, it's going to come out of your pay.
Yeah, but Sheriff, he's getting away.
Son, he's not going anywhere. The Mulberry Bridge has been dismantled for the past 6 months.
Oh.
Now not only are we told this, we're also shown it. Now this is important because it builds up anticipation. It builds up anxiety for the audience. We know what's coming ahead for Bandit before he does. Now if we'd found out at the same time, the jump would still be impressive, but we wouldn't have that same sense of relief because we haven't been wondering how he's going to get out of this. Now when Bandit finds out that the bridge is out, the easy option would be to just have him floor it and clear the bridge no problem. But they didn't do that. They chose to have him turn around instead. And whilst this builds up anticipation for the audience, it also shows another side of Bandit's character. He's not some crazy person who just floors it and sees what happens. He's calculated. He works on risk and reward, so if one way's blocked, he's going to try and find another way. Now unfortunately that way's blocked too, so he has to turn around and jump the bridge anyway. But by just adding this little bit into the chase, it makes the jump scene far more meaningful. If Bandit's unsure about doing it, then we're unsure about doing it. Now once Bandit turns away from the police and commits to the jump, the camera switches onto Bandit and Frog. They're talking about what's about to happen. Again, it's all about building anticipation for the audience, so that when they do make the jump, we get that huge sigh of relief. Now, as I spoke about earlier, the Trans Am, even though it looked great, it wasn't the fastest. And especially on these dirt roads, it was impossible to get it up to enough speed to be able to actually do the jump. Now, in the days before CGI, if you wanted a car to do something, you had to find a way to make it able to do it. And the way they were able to do this was they switched out the automatic transmission for a manual, and they switched out the engine for a 750 horsepower NASCAR engine from Hal Needham's NASCAR race team. The filming of the jump was done with just 3 cameras, so one where it takes off, one mid-air, and one where it lands. By keeping the filming simple, it adds realism to the scene. And even when they've added slow motion, again that adds to the scene. It shows us the enormity of the jump. And with that final shot of it landing, you can see just how far it's cleared the bridge by, so again, just how far that car has jumped. Now of course this is a jump that only Bandit can do. So when the hapless police get to the bridge, one of them just falls in the river, the other breaks just in time, before Buford hits the back of him and knocks him into the river anyway.
See? I didn't wreck it, Sheriff.
Now the chase scene is just a run-of-the-mill dirt road, police versus bad guy chase scene. What makes it special is the jump, as they brilliantly build up the anticipation, and then they execute it to perfection. Now without the jump, this chase scene's maybe a 2, 3 out of 10. With the jump, it bumps it up to an 8. Now let's have a look at the crashes. Now there's only 2 crashes in this scene, both after Bandit makes the jump. And although they're relatively easy to do, they're very easy to get wrong. So just like any other part of the movie, a car crash, it has to be done for a reason. So storyline level, we need Bandit to have outfoxed yet another police force, and we need Buford to still be in the chase. There's also the overall vibe of the movie to consider. So just like with the rest of the movie, it's believable comedy. It's not spoof, it's not over the top, but it's extreme enough to be funny. Now the way they filmed these 2 crashes, they've cheated a little bit. So as we can see, the first car that goes into the water, it's the Plymouth Satellite that they swapped out for some reason midway through the chase. And as you can see, his wheels are turned left, trying to avoid crashing over the edge, but he takes some of the side of the bridge with him and goes over anyway. Now as the second car approaches the bridge, we can see again, it's a Plymouth Satellite. So we've started the chase with 2 Furies, we've gone Fury Satellite, now we've got 2 satellites. In the next shot, however, we're back to it being a Plymouth Fury, as you can clearly see by the headlights and the Fury badge on the side. So what they've done basically is they've had the satellite go off the bridge, then they've reused that approach footage for the second crash, and switched it out for the Fury being the one that just dangles off the bridge at the end. Now this isn't a continuity mistake or an editing mistake. I mean, it is kind of a mistake. I don't know why they just didn't use 2 Furies to begin with. But the reason they've reused that approach shot is to make it look like the second car is travelling under its own power. So we can see the dust behind it, it looks like it's travelling at speed. But what it looks like they've done is they've just locked those front wheels up and pushed that car from behind. And presumably there's a chain on the back of that car which only allows it to go over so far. And that's because they need that car to finish at a certain angle, just before its tipping point, so that when Buford hits the back of it, it doesn't take much for that car to drop down. And with the back of that car sticking up in the air, we get the comedic bend of the bonnet when Buford hits it.
See? I didn't wreck it, Sheriff.
So like I said, 2 relatively easy stunts that are very easy to get wrong, but they didn't. They got them both right. And the comedic timing of Buford hitting the car at the end always makes me laugh. So I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Now let's have a look at the climax. Now the exact length of the bridge jump is unclear. It seems to be between 150 and 175 feet depending on different reports. Now for context, that's about 4.5 double-decker bus lengths. Now a jump is very hard to do because you have to get every part of it right. You have to get your ramp angle right, you have to get your distance right, you have to get your speed right. Now a great example of this was at the 40-year anniversary of Smokey and the Bandit, where they tried to recreate the bridge jump. And although it's unlikely that the car used in Smokey and the Bandit went on to drive again, it certainly kept straight and it landed on all four wheels. And bear in mind that 40th anniversary jump was done in the middle of a racetrack with nothing around it. The Smokey and the Bandit jump was done through trees over a huge drop, so there's very little room for error. Now we've spoken about the engine swap and a transmission swap to enable the car to be able to make the jump. But the important thing in this jump is to keep the car as level as possible for as long as possible. Now obviously the engine is the heaviest part of the car, so when the car is in mid-air, the engine is being pulled to the ground. So to compensate for this, they weight down the rear end, usually just put in slabs of concrete in the back. But obviously the more weight you put in, the more power you need, and the harder that landing's going to be. And the more level that you keep that car, the less height you need. So the safer the jump, and the more realistic it looks. So from a technical point of view, they got this jump perfect. They couldn't have done it any better. The choice of camera shots was right, and the slow motion worked perfectly. Now as far as storyline goes, not only do we get the comedic aftermath, but this is the moment that Frog learns that she can trust Bandit. This is where the romance really starts to blossom. The climax of this chase makes the chase. Bandit has made the impossible seem possible. They set it up brilliantly and they executed it perfectly. So 9.5 out of 10. Now let's have a look at the mistakes though. Now the first one isn't a mistake, it's just something that I wish they hadn't done. And that's the speeding up of the film. Now I understand why they did it. As we discussed earlier, it's hard to make cars look like they're travelling at any kind of speed on a dirt road. But for me it just cheapens the shots a little bit. Now the biggest mistake is the switching of the cars. Now I don't know why they did this. Maybe they could sacrifice a satellite going in the river, but they needed to save a Fiore for another scene. Who knows, but either way it's a mistake. Now at the start of the chase, as we're looking from the roadblock, we see the hill and we see that house in the background. Now the problem is, earlier on in the movie when Bandit is on his way to get the booze, we see the same hill and the same house in the background, and Bandit is travelling in the same direction. Now just like the majority of car chases, there's a few scenes where we see skid marks on the road before the car has done the skid. Now when the first car goes over the edge, despite it turning left, it still lands pretty central. When the second car hangs over the bridge, however, the first car is nowhere to be seen. Also, when that first car goes over the bridge, it takes some of the bridge with it, but there is still quite a bit of that bridge wall remaining. However, when the second car is hanging over the bridge, it's completely clear. And obviously when that second car is approaching the bridge wall's completely intact, because they reuse that footage as we spoke about earlier. Now there's not a ton of mistakes in this scene, but it is quite a small scene and there are a couple of big mistakes. So I'm going to take off 4 points. Now let's have a look at the final score. Now all these components come together to make or break the car chase, and I think Smokey and the Bandit, just like with the rest of the movie, got this scene right. So they get a total score of 58 out of 70. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.